Hello everybody, hope you're all doing well. My name is Steven and this is the Storytime channel. Today we have some malicious compliance stories and our first story of the day is by NF Kappa B Alpha. You need to check all of our food? Fine. So this happened like 7 or 8 years ago when I was jobbing at a driving service while I was a student. The driving service was one for people with disabilities that could not drive or walk on their own. Our main office was in the building of a housing/working facility for disabled people. The two companies, our driver service and the housing facility, were loosely connected as they were both financed by the same organization. However, management-wise, they were clearly separated. We were about 15 drivers at this location, and we shared our lunch/social room with about 10 caretakers. Since our schedules were horribly organized, the drivers often had idle time, so the social room was where everybody hung around, waiting for work. One day, my boss, call him Tom, brought cake to work because he became 60. The cake was enormous, like a wedding cake could hide behind it twice. I can only imagine how expensive it must have been. At 9, every driver had eaten some pieces and there was still like 80% of it left, so Tom told the caretakers they should feel free to take some. Then Karen happened. She was something like the security inspector of the facility. So she had authority over the caretakers but no dealings with the driving service. Her job was to watch for potential hazards, organize the caretaker's schedule, and generally having an eye on everything happening. When she heard there was cake, she was furious. She and Tom couldn't stand each other, so she was always trying to ruin his day. In this particular instance, she claimed the cake was a health hazard as it contained cream and she could not verify whether the cooling chain was never broken during transport. So she threw it all away. Roughly 400 euros worth of food just thrown away. Needless to say, Tom was less than amused. He went extremely mad. He was usually a very calm and gentle man, and this was the only time ever that I heard him shouting at someone. Still, there was nothing he could do. Karen could basically declare anything a hazard and take action how she saw fit, and her higher-up didn't really care. To make matters worse, she doubled down and demanded that every food that was brought into the social room had to be inspected by her first. Cue malicious compliance. Obviously, all the drivers were mad at Karen for upsetting Tom and for throwing away a perfectly fine cake. So the next day, first thing in the morning, 15 drivers went to her office. Every one with his lunch demanding she inspect it. It took her roughly 10 minutes looking at sandwiches and answering questions whether mayonnaise was too hazardous to be brought in. This went on for the whole week. Each day, our questions about hazardous foods becoming more dumb and degenerate. On Friday, it took her more than 2 hours to inspect our lunch as we would collectively steal her time. Afternoon, she said she got the message and that sandwiches got a general okay and not to bother her with it anymore. Fine. The following week, we went out of our way to eat anything but sandwiches. Salads, cake, pretzels, normal lunch stuff. Every day, there was a line in front of her office having their lunch checked, asking stupid questions whether this food was or was not too dangerous to enter the social room. Karen was losing her patience, becoming increasingly aggressive towards us, but still refused to apologize to Tom. Then, at the end of week 2 of food checking, Tom brought a bucket for lunch. When he entered Karen's office to have his lunch checked, like he did every day, and opened the lid of his lunch pot, the smell hit everyone in the vicinity like a brick to the face. Apparently, he made some unholy mix of garlic, cream, pickles, and herring, which he called fish soup. It looked like what happens if you leave something dead in the sun for too long. All brownish and sluggy with some green specks in it, and it reeked twice as bad as it looked. Karen looked as if she would puke any moment, commanding him to remove this monstrosity from her office. Tom asked if she didn't want to check it, since he could imagine the cooling chain could have been broken during transport or sometime in the last 2 weeks. The lot of us drivers laughed so hard, I swear some nearly choked from laughter. This was roughly the time that Karen had to admit defeat. Food checking stopped immediately, and the following week, Tom brought another cake. To be honest, I thought this Karen lasted longer than I would have expected. Several weeks taking hours to review everybody's lunch every single day? I would have quit way earlier than that. Considering how massive this cake was and how much Tom probably spent on it, do you think in reality Tom is owed some form of compensation either by Karen or the company she represents? Let me know in the comments down below. Our next story is by Swan Medic. Oh sir, this transaction can take as long as you need. I'm paid by the hour. I do feel kind of bad about this one now, but it happened a few years ago and it's a funny story to tell, so what the heck. I used to be a shift manager at a collectible store where we sold a lot of used movies, games, figurines, etc. The kind of place that old school collectors drool over. So we saw our fair share of enthusiasts coming and going. A lot of them were really nice, passionate people that were just jazzed as heck that they had a local place to look for rarities. Often chatty, often not super aware of how much time they were taking from staff by striking up a conversation, but it was both good for business and pretty fun to oblige these people when they came in, so we often did. We had a guy who for a period of a few months would come in about once a week to look at the cartridge games. The thing to know about our cartridge games is that they were all on display in large glass cases which, if you wanted to sift through them, required an employee to wait with you to prevent theft. Some stuff in those cases was worth hundreds of dollars. Not typically a big problem, but this guy often bought items in bulk and had very particular tastes. I'm not sure if he was a reseller, which we sometimes saw, or an honest-to-goodness collector, but he'd only ever buy bags of our cheapest stock. Every week he'd come in and request someone open each case one by one, and he could spend 45 minutes to an hour just browsing through titles. This wouldn't have been the biggest deal, but we typically only had 3 or 4 people working, and this store could get pretty busy on evenings and weekends. Going from 2 cashiers to 1 cashier made a big difference. We would end up getting swallowed by the late day rush without one of our staff members so consistently that we started making a policy just for this guy where he could leave his ID at the counter with us as collateral and browse through the games unattended. However, this didn't stop other people from nabbing stuff while he wasn't looking, so it wasn't a sustainable option. Along with spending forever browsing, this guy also took an eternity to check out. He would group the games up by price, type his estimated cost into a calculator, add tax, then when you rang it up, he'd argue with you about how, no, this isn't what I got, look at this, and show you the calculator and explain the math, as if any of this was manually calculated by us, which was basically always wrong. To his credit, sometimes discounts had to be manually added to certain items that I know at least one newbie forgot to do, but a general most of the time the computer would generate the correct price and he'd argue it. I didn't like him coming in and causing backups, especially because he was rude to my staff when he did it, so I decided to take matters into my own hands. On a day when I was shift leader, I saw him enter the store. I pulled aside one of my cashiers and told him to just help the guy as usual, then let me ring him up. My employee got the idea and did as I asked, walking our regular to the cabinets and babysitting him for nearly an hour. Luckily, it was early afternoon and we weren't terribly busy. When the customer finally got to the counter, he had a basket full of items, stacked them up, and I hopped in front of the computer. He started punching all of his values into the calculator and got right to work telling me about how much each thing should be and what the total should come out to. I put on my best customer service smile and said, "Of course, sir. I want to make sure that you're getting everything exactly as calculated so we can go down the items together and make sure everything rings up correctly." Our computers ran on a system that would automatically scan a price and generate the number, but for things like specialty sales and discounts for items that didn't have their own product entry, it was possible for a manager to key in a manual price for any item scanned, even if it was the same price. So that's exactly what I did. For each item, reading the price out slowly to him to make sure he heard it. And he had 118 items. I went down each old cartridge, clearly stating and typing them, $1.99, $2.99, $1.99, and he followed along with me. By the time I got to the end of the list, it must have been 15 to 20 minutes of just scanning items, and I gave him his total. Of course, he countered it. He told me that that's not what he got on his calculator and showed me the math and explained how everything should have been applied. My mistake, sir. Let's go through it again to make sure we have everything right. I cleared the transaction and started over. One more time, all 118 items, reading each price as slowly and clearly as I could, plunking the number keys loudly as I typed them in. Again, another 15 to 20 minutes of just scanning and typing. The customer was looking slightly agitated but followed along on his calculator, and when I got to the end of the list, the total was exactly the same as before. He shook his head, saying, "No, that's not right. There's something wrong with the computer." I watched him go through the math again, retyping everything in. Then after a moment, he paused, surprised. "Oh, I added one of these in wrong. Okay, you had the right price." I did my best to keep my face as calm and as apologetic as possible. "I'm sorry, sir, but after you said the math was wrong, I cleared the transaction again. No worries, we can scan the items back in." So there we went, round 3. 118 items, me typing in each price manually and reading it out loud, nice and slow, so he could be sure I was doing it right. At this point, he had definitely caught on to what I was doing. He quietly said, "Could we hurry it up a little?" And so I started reading and plunking a bit faster. Still took a nice 15 minutes to get through the list again, and lo and behold, same price as before. He paid the total without another word and left with his items. I never saw him back in the store again, at least not while I was working. Stores like this are always a fun place to be, at least for me, but seeing some dude crouching in front of the cartridge case for over an hour just looking at stuff, that would be a major turnoff not just for the employees, but for the customers. If anybody wants to go look at that cartridge thing, they have to go stand next to this dude that's just kind of hovering there, obsessing over all these cartridge games for nearly an hour. He's a well-paying customer, but he's not great for business. Our next story is by Sibmai. "You won't accept my card? Okay, see you soon. Yesterday I had to go get my diploma at college. Yay, 2020 class, what's up?" On the way there, I remembered my spoiled 6-year-old brother demands sweets every time someone comes home. So, to avoid his tantrum and my mom yelling at me for not giving him anything, I decided to stop on my way back and buy him some candy. By the time I was back, everywhere was closed, except for a wall market and a little deli owned by an old neighborhood couple, whom I'll call Boomer and Karen. So I decided to support our local community and whatnot. After standing on the socially distant line for a single chocolate bar, I finally got to the cashier/Karen, who refused to accept my card because the chocolate was like $2 and they only accepted $30 plus on debit. Both her and Boomer, with an old farts thinking they're smart smirk, then suggested I buy more stuff to match the value. I refused, so she started yelling at me for wasting her time and messing the store. Remember, I got a single chocolate bar. While she yelled her fat guts out, I saw a stand saying they were taking delivery orders through X app and little photos of different debit/credit cards. I had used it a few times already. I just looked at her, said, "Okay," and left. When I was out of there, I looked their store up, no minimum value and no delivery fee. So it was my time to smirk now. I waited a few minutes, ordered the darn chocolate, put the delivery address at a house a few numbers away, and waited there. Seeing Boomer trotting down the street in full protection gear with a single chocolate in a bag, look at me right under the delivery number he was looking for and stop on his tracks, the visible parts of his face getting redder and redder? Lovely. I extended my hand and said, "Thanks." He handed me the bag without a word. I watched as he walked back to his darn deli, taking mental notes to never go there again, then walked back home with a smile under my mask. This little game took almost 30 minutes, but the feeling of owning greedy boomers was worth it. So much for supporting the locals. So for small mom and pop shops like this, I totally understand having a minimum amount on a debit order or something like that, because there's a transaction fee that they have to pay when they process your debit card. $30 minimum though is ridiculous. I don't know if they're getting ripped off by whoever does their payment processing or if they're just trying to be greedy as all heck, but that is ridiculous. It should be like $5 minimum. And our final story of the day is by OTF Dude. Manager calls employees bluffed resignation. I was working for a decent-sized family company that had internally promoted a manager from a different department to run a sizable branch for the company. He was warned about a particular employee who was known to cause trouble and was generally very contentious. I will call her Karen. Karen worked in inside sales and was a notorious gossip who loved to spread rumors regardless of their validity. She also made several younger male coworkers uncomfortable with her rather aggressive advances. This was mostly mitigated to how particular clothing fit a guy, but occasionally progressed to outright propositions for their mutual lunch breaks. At best, she was okay at her job, but generally made the workplace less than stellar. Karen also had a reputation for annually seeking raises from the prior manager by resigning. This was usually met with some form of concession just to placate her and keep her and her customer base on board. The new manager heard this story, and the passing of the info about Karen just so happened to coincide with a drop in sales. To a small degree the company's, and to a larger, hers. So to Karen's routine, she walked into the new, inexperienced manager with the news that she simply wasn't going to be able to work there anymore. Unfazed, he immediately reacted with sincere regret that they wouldn't get to work with each other professionally. Karen's confident look immediately shifted to fear. She floundered out a sentence about how she wasn't making what she needed to make, to which the manager totally agreed with her and again reiterated his best wishes in her next opportunity. He then stood and said that he would need something formal written up for HR, but she could do it anytime that day. Wasting no time, he immediately sent a glowing note to the staff about losing a true asset to the department and invited everyone to a going-away party in the kitchen that afternoon. At the party, Karen was a woman walking and interacting with guests at her own funeral. I imagine she was wondering how she would go home to her husband and explain that she had quit her job that morning. Fortunately for all, she was far too prideful to admit that it was all a tactic, and that was Karen's last day with the company. Afterwards, the branch ran fairly smoothly. It turns out she was indeed mediocre, and her customers were more than happy to have a fresh rep on their accounts. A few years later, the manager was again promoted and the pseudo-fired move was renamed, got left to go pursue other opportunities. As in, Karen got left to go pursue other opportunities. That Karen just dug their own grave. You have to be very well prepared for it not to go the way you want the bluff to go. It's a shame that Karen was way too prideful, or else they wouldn't have lost the job. It would have been embarrassing and it would have been going back on their word, but they wouldn't be out of a job. Either way, it was good for the company. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. So which of these stories was your favorite and why? Let me know in the comments down below. But besides that, if you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing and turn notifications on if you haven't so you'll never miss an upcoming video. Any little thing that you do helps the channel grow so much more. Whether it's commenting, subscribing, or just watching the video, thank you all so very much for supporting me right here on the Storytime channel. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you all next time, right here.